Welcome to Cell Biology Neuroscience 106. Hopefully that's why you're here. Introduction to Neuroscience. I am the primary instructor for this course, for the lecture part of the course. And where are the TAs? There's one. Do you know where the other one is? Okay, so you guys stand up. And why don't you introduce yourselves? Borrow the mic if you want. Okay. And one more thing, if things go well, she will get her PhD by the end of this quarter. Thank you. So what I want to do today is probably fairly traditional for an orientation lecture. I want to tell you about the course content, what you can expect to learn in that. I want to tell you a little bit about the discussion, what you can expect in that. I want to show you what the readings are, not what the readings are, but what the sources of the material are going to be for the course. I want to tell you about the tests, when they'll be, what the format of them is, the degree of difficulty. I want to tell you about the degree of difficulty of the course and generally what it's going to be like as much as I can. And in doing that, what I'm trying to do is anticipate the questions you might have. But really what I want to do and what I want you to walk out with at the end of the lecture today, which is just a standard orientation lecture, is feeling comfortable that you know what to do and what to anticipate for this particular course. Okay, so you're welcome to ask questions anytime. Starting off, I understand that there is some probably pretty small segment of students that's interested in knowing a little bit about the instructor, so I'll do like a minute-ish about me, and then that's probably the last you'll hear about me. So I'm a Floridian. I've lived in a number of different places in Florida. I lived in Florida Keys, in Miami, in Daytona Beach, in Gainesville, and Pensacola. Yeah, my family moved around a lot. Didn't spend all my time there. I lived in Mexico for 3 years, specifically Guadalajara. Also in Texas for about 3 years, specifically in San Antonio. After finishing high school, because all of that was before high school, after finishing high school, the draft, this was back during the Vietnam War, kind of interceded with any plans I might have had, so I ended up in the United States Army for 3 years, served a tour of duty over in Korea, specifically South Korea, of course. And the big thing that I got out of the Army, other than some time to grow up and get some craziness out of my system, was the GI Bill. And what the GI Bill provided to me was college tuition. And so I went to a junior college for a while because basically I couldn't have gotten anything else based on my rather poor high school grades. And then I went to the University of Florida, where two important things happened. And not rank ordering them, I met Patty Kane, who became Patty Kane Stanley, my wife still. And also I was introduced to neuroscience. I started working in a lab there at the University of Florida, got my degree, went to Princeton University in New Jersey. 4 years later, in '82, I got my PhD. Then I started working in Manhattan, worked at Rockefeller University for about 6 years, starting as a postdoc, ending up as an assistant professor. And then, woohoo, I was offered a job here at UC Riverside. Back then, about 8,000 total number of students. There's no better career. Basically, as a professor at a research university, you get to create knowledge through research. You get to train the future scientists. Tiffany, Tyler being examples, not my students, but graduate students. And you get to teach the citizens of California, the United States, and sometimes the world. What could be better than that? Okay. So on a personal side of things, I have 2 sons, a little bit older than most of you guys are, I'm guessing. The oldest, 27, he graduated from UCI, had wanderlust, spent a year in Vietnam and Hanoi teaching little kids English. Then he applied to the Peace Corps. He's now in South America, beginning a 2-year tour in the country of Guyana. Will be based, he's in the training phase of it, will be based in a really isolated, remote, he's happy as can be. My youngest son, Brian, 24, graduated from Cal State Long Beach. He went through a 6 months of no job after that. Got a fantastic job working at the port, also as happy as can be. Okay, so enough about me. On the course content. So this is about neuroscience. I'm talking mostly about the lecture. What is it that you can expect to learn in this course? Well, many introductory courses do surveys. They cover a lot of material, a lot of different topics about that deep. I don't like doing that. What I like to do is to pick a small number of particularly important topics and dive in as deeply as possible, given 10 weeks to cover the material. And so you can really think of the course as having 2 halves. The first half, the first 5 weeks, being that leading up to the midterm, is a very cellular kind of approach. And then after the midterm, the last 5 weeks is very systems level. So in the first 5 weeks of the course, it's going to be focused mostly on the neuron. At the end of the lecture tomorrow, we'll start talking about the different parts of the neuron. And then moving on from there, we'll be talking for about 3 weeks about electrical signaling of the neuron, resting membrane potential, what the function of resting membrane potential, a lot about what the mechanisms are for production of resting membrane potential. Then we'll talk about action potentials, a little bit about what the function of action potentials are, a lot about what the mechanisms are underlying action potentials. And then we'll talk about synaptic potentials, which are actually much more interesting and complicated. A little bit about what the functions of synaptic potentials are, and then a lot about what the mechanisms are for the production of synaptic potentials. And just to tell you, basically, the function of synaptic potentials is to produce action potentials, and the function of action potentials is to cause the release of transmitter, which is a way that the neurons interact with each other. And then at the last topic that we'll cover in the first 5 weeks, the first half of the class, will be neurotransmitters, receptors, neurotransmitter release, binding to receptors, and all that kind of stuff. Okay? First half of the course. Second half of the course, very, very different because it's much more big picture. Instead of talking about a neuron or a couple of neurons or 3 neurons, we'll talk about systems that may have 1 million or even 1 billion neurons. So we'll spend, for example, about 3 weeks on the visual system, starting with the retina, looking at the activity of the neurons that first respond to light, through the levels of processing, how the processing of light information changes, going to the thalamus, back to primary visual cortex, where you get the first cortical coding of visual information that starts to lead to perception. We'll skip over a lot of the processing areas, then going to once over lightly and go to a final area where visual information is processed at the level of a concept, where you can find neurons that respond specifically to complex stimuli like faces and hands, okay, things like that. Then we'll move on to that. So that's a model of a sensory system. We'll do one sensory system in depth. That's the visual system. Then we'll move on to motor systems. We'll do 2 motor systems. One will be a motor system that is involved in locomotion, things like pacing back and forth in front of you, walking, or swimming in a fish, or flying a bird. Basically, the mechanisms underlying the different forms of locomotion are very similar. Those involve mechanisms that are largely in the brainstem and the spinal cord. And at the end of that particular subsection about movement control, motor control it's called, we'll talk about central pattern generators, and there we'll take an invertebrate model, because this is not just about human anatomy, this is about neuroanatomy, brains, nervous systems in general, from simple to complex. We'll take and we'll spend a lecture on a pond snail nervous system and a central pattern generator, which fits right into motor control systems, because central pattern generators are central to spinal controls of locomotion. That, okay? And then finally, we'll end up kind of a quick overview of cortical mechanisms of motor control. Right, so a little bit of that, forebrain kind of stuff, the kind of motor control that's involved in controlling your hands, taking notes, keyboarding, playing the piano, things like that. Okay, so that's the quick overview of what the course content itself is going to be. Shift to discussions. Tiffany gave you a little bit about that just a minute ago. You can think of the discussions as also existing in two parts. About half of the discussion sections, I believe 5, will involve you doing sheep brain dissections, okay? And then at the end of the sheep brain dissection components of it, which are going to be distributed over the entire 10 weeks, you'll have a neuroanatomy practicum. So there'll be 20 or so different setups with sheep brains or parts of sheep brains at each one of them. Many of those will have pins in them, and your task will be to go from station to station to station, naming what the pin is in or the function of what the pin is in. It's a typical kind of neuroanatomy practicum. That's 10% of your grade for the course, by the way. The other 5 discussion sections are more traditional question-answer kinds of periods where the TAs can explain what I didn't explain well, or what the lecture notes may not have explained well, or what the book may not have explained well. Okay, so you have several of those. There's also a pre-midterm meeting, so that there's a kind of run up to the midterm, and then after the midterm, you'll get your scantrons back in discussion section, so you can find out what you made and why you didn't get the score you thought you should have gotten on the midterm, and what the answers were to specific questions. And then the same kind of thing will happen before the final exam. So there'll be a preview of the final exam in the discussion section before the final exam, which unfortunately is Saturday night, 7 to 10 p.m. Some of you are happier about that. I'd prefer the 7 a.m. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Okay. Questions so far? So as a hint for the future, so, in this wall of students in front of me, if you get back to the back, the students in back of you will mask your hand. So if you raise your hand, put a little movement in it, that's much more likely that I'll see it, okay? And for the future, because otherwise, the chances of me seeing a still hand raised are pretty low. Okay, so what are the sources of information for this course? The lecture I'll get back to in a few minutes. So one of those is this textbook, Neuroscience Exploring the Brain. Make sure you get the 4th edition. There's been a long time gap between the 3rd and the 4th edition. The 3rd edition is quite outdated by now, so get a 4th edition, which came out just about a year ago, okay? Bookstore, internet, various kind of sources. There are some used ones in the bookstore, okay? And then you guys know cheaper places to get them. It's not a cheap book. My apologies, and this one's now yours. For a moment, anyway. So that's one. The textbooks are on reserve in the science library, or Bach library. I'm almost resist doing that because it's very tempting for students to think, okay, I can skip buying the book and save the money. From the reading that's going to be assigned, you're going to be assigned 11 chapters, basically. And many of those chapters you'll need to read multiple times. The chances you'll be able to have enough time in the library with the textbooks on reserve to do well is probably not very good. So I don't suggest you go that route, but you're adults, that's your choice. Okay, so that's one. Another is the reader, which will not look exactly like this. The content's the same. Okay, and what the reader has in it, it has hints for figuring out electrical potential kinds of problems. It will be very helpful. It has a previous midterm exam. Some questions may be on the midterm this year. I don't know. It also has the answers. One of the recommendations I have, take the practice exam without looking at the answers. Sorry, so you're already getting a little hints. There are also a couple of assigned readings in here. That's one. And that one, not particularly a big deal, but importantly, we'll get to it eventually. There's this last item in the reader. It's called In Vitro Reconstruction of the Respiratory Central Pattern Generator of the Mollusk Limnaeus. Great title, very, very sexy, you know, it's like Superman, Batman thing. I'll spend a whole lecture talking about this particular thing. It's the only source of information, unless you actually go to the library and find the source article in this. So the reader's important. It'll be available to you in the bookstore. $13 to $16 is what they're estimating that'll cost. Many of the materials in here are online in iLearn, but that one is not. It's a copyrighted thing. I can't put it on iLearn. Okay, bookstore. And then lastly, in terms of written material, is iLearn, of course. So just for clarity, the biggest source of information for you guys outside of the lecture itself are the lecture notes, right? And the lecture notes that are posted on iLearn are exactly the same lecture notes that I'm lecturing from. They were lecture notes that were created, you know, like a decade or so ago from someone recording the lectures I was giving back then that got printed out, got transcribed, and I've been updating them ongoing since then, right? So what I'm working from is exactly that. Vast amounts of your testing will be from the lecture notes, more so than from the book. But the book is important because the lecture and the book kind of work with each other. Okay, so they kind of feed off of each other. So that's probably, if you want to, you know, what is the most single important source of written information, the lecture notes that are available on iLearn are it. Okay. What's there on iLearn, you can probably print out if you like to do that. I do update those lecture notes as I go through, but the updates are usually pretty trivial. Okay. Also, there are the PowerPoint projections. Those are basically what I project up on the screen that show pretty pictures, most of them from the book. Okay. In some cases, the PowerPoint has some of the material that's in the lecture notes, but not very much that's unique to the PowerPoint, right? So the lecture notes are the critically important part. And then there's the lecture itself. Basically, this is a hard course. It's not the hardest course on campus. I teach a lab where basically it's graduating seniors are taking it, and I frequently will ask them, you know, what's the hardest course you've had here? And more recently, physics was one of the top ones. So this is not going to be like, you know, like physics. Okay, it's not that difficult, but it's a very challenging course, and it's very challenging for a variety of different reasons. The material itself is intrinsically difficult. This is neuroscience. This is how the brain works. It's technically difficult. It's conceptually difficult. Much of the information, much of the way that the brain works, much of the way that neurons work is counterintuitive. It isn't what you would expect. Some of you will actually resist it works this way because it just doesn't seem like it should. So for example, the very first response of the first cells in the nervous system to light is to be decreased in activity by light. You wouldn't think that. You would think it would be light would activate them. No. The first stage in visual processing is deactivation of neurons that happen to be highly active at night. That's one of many, many examples of counterintuitive, paradoxical, if you will, ways that the nervous system works. All right, so there's a lot of information. It's technically difficult. It's conceptually difficult, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We go through a fair amount of material, a pretty substantial amount of information. The tests themselves are difficult. I'll tell you more about that in a bit. But what I try and do here in the lecture is break it down and explain as simply as I can without oversimplifying the information. Okay? And so even though you can get a lot out of the lecture notes, they're not done, and they were taken from my lectures, they're not standalone. I explain the lecture notes. So if you want to do well in the class, there are lots of components to that. One of those that some of you will not do, I know because I've seen this in the past, 8-10 class thing. Oh my God, that's just so early. I can't possibly get up and go to lecture at something like 8:10. Horrible. Well, just to think, when you finish college, real world, I don't do many preaches. I'm doing a preach now. Okay. The real world, most of your job will start at 8:30, 9 o'clock. Real world, this isn't that early. Okay. So you will benefit by coming to lectures awake, having got a good night's sleep, all that. That's a discipline thing. I know some of you work and have night jobs and things like that. That I can't help. I understand that. But for those that aren't, that don't, just come to lecture. It will benefit you, really. Okay? I will tell you that the lecture on Thursday is fairly fluffy. It's not a representation of what the typical lecture is. The typical lecture is pretty hardcore, lots of information and lots of explaining. Okay, so if you come on Thursday and go, well, wow, half of that's not going to be testable. Yeah, you're right. It isn't. It's very philosophical, but I'm laying a foundation on Thursday. Come to lecture if you want to do it. Don't be wrong. I know that a third typically. Typically don't do very well. Okay? This is a full class. There are people that want to get into this class. If you're not really committed to it, why are you here? Right? I think the course should be required, but if you're not going to commit to learning the material, why come? Why pay the tuition? Why have your GPA take the kind of beating it's going to? Okay, the lectures are important. Recommend you come. You're adults. Okay, stop preaching off of the little pulpit here. So I will say one other thing about that. I just have to get back on the pulpit. So I live in Costa Mesa. That one other personal item. Irvine, 52 miles driving. I get up at 5 o'clock to get here. I've been late over the last 25 years to 2 classes. Right? So I can do it. I'm an old guy. You guys are young. Okay. Enough of that. Let's see. So a test. So everybody's eager to know about the test. There's a lot of information up on the syllabus, and you have the syllabus as well. It's on iLearn, right? And so I already mentioned the practical exam that you're going to have in the discussion section. That's worth 10% of your grade. In addition to that, you have a midterm. The date's there. I don't remember what it is exactly, but it's the beginning of the 6th week, typically. Okay. The midterm is probably going to be about 50 questions. They are almost certainly going to be multiple choice, matching, true, false. There's not going to be an essay. It's a Scantron test. Okay. That counts for approximately 30% of your grade. There should not be any time pressure on that. And most of the material will come from the lecture with some from the book. And a lot of it kind of interacting with the lecture and the book. The final exam counts for 60% of your grade. It'll be twice as long and have twice as many points in it as the midterm. If it follows past history, roughly 80 of those questions will be multiple choice type questions. And then there's going to be a gargantuan essay or 2 or 3. The gargantuan essay, let's just say it's 1. Okay, you may get a choice of 2 or something like that. I haven't figured that one out yet. The essay will be of a format that basically is tell me everything you know about X. It's not going to be some trivial topic. It'll be something that we've covered in depth. Maybe then only one lecture in depth, and if you miss that lecture, ouch. Okay? So it's something that you could legitimately spend half an hour answering. These are deep essays, right? And so that would be 20 points of the 100 point of the final exam. Okay? The final exams are cumulative, so about a third of the material on the final exam will come from the first half of the course. About 2/3 of the final exam material will be the last 2/3 of the course, so that in terms of points, you don't have to figure out the math of this. In terms of points, your midterm, you'll have the same number of points from the first half of the class to the last half of the class if you combine the midterm and the final together. Okay. In terms of the degree of difficulty, well, there shouldn't be time pressure. So by the time the midterm and the final period are over, pretty much everyone's gone. Okay, but that's easily going to be 2 hours, 2.5 hours for the final exam. So there's no time pressure, but the questions themselves are designed to be difficult. Not all of them. There's some that are gimmies, but not many. The questions that are really good require you to extrapolate a little bit or integrate information from several different pieces and put them together, even though they're multiple choice. Right? Still do that with multiple choice. Or analyze. I try and avoid math as much as possible. Even the questions that have numerical answers that you could solve using a calculator, you can usually solve without a calculator if you just really understand the question well. There are intuitive ways of solving them as well as mathematical ways of solving them. And what I'm really trying to do is to make each question a little intellectual puzzle. Okay, so this is about learning, and it's really about understanding. It's really about deeply understanding the material. So it's challenging in that way. The material is challenging. The exams are challenging. So why take the course? Any questions so far? So why take the course? Well, despite all this other stuff about things being challenging, the curve is pretty easy. It's the one odd thing I do in terms of grading. All right, so it's pretty much a traditional biology, physiology kind of course in terms of degree of difficulty and all of that. But I've been very generous on the curve. So typically 20, 25% A's, right, which is unusual for a course like this. We do cover the entire range. There will be F's, not 20% F's, but there will be F's. Okay, and D's and all those other grades. It's not like everything is an A and B. Okay, so the curve is unusually easy for this kind of course. That's one. That's a less important reason as far as I'm concerned. More importantly, the material itself is fascinating. I mean, basically, we are talking about brain, mind, if you will, and plumbing at an introductory level the very essence of what it is, the way we think. And there will be profound insights that you'll gain from this course, things that if you're really into it, you're really thinking about it, will change the way you think about yourselves and others. And so there are very few topics that are more fascinating than this kind of material. Okay. Now, of course, I'm biased. I am a neuroscientist, but almost every year, some students tell me or write in their evaluations, this is the most fascinating course I've ever taken. Sure, it's all because I'm a fantastic lecturer. Oh, well, maybe it's the content of the course. Okay, I'm not bad as a lecturer. So let's see. Cheating and makeups on the exams. I will prosecute and persecute cheating to the fullest extent I'm able. If you're caught cheating, you obviously get a 0 on the exam. For pretty much anything that means you're going to make an F in the course. You're also going to be turned over to, they changed the name of it, student conduct or something like that. It used to be called student judicial affairs, basically. And, if you're convicted there and there's no single time when I've reported a student to that unit that they weren't convicted, actually wrote some of the initial policy for what's considered cheating and how that's handled. Then sometimes that information can be accessible to your future employers or med schools. Okay, and I'm going to do it. Just count it. I'm going to do it. So some people spend as much effort on trying to cheat as they would if they invested the same material, same time into learning the course. They actually learn something other than how to cheat and get some information out of it. Okay, so that's it on the cheating. Sorry for sounding onerous, but that's just the way it is. I want to be really clear about that. And for makeups, I despise giving makeups. That's just honest. Everyone does. Some people lie about it. And so what typically happens with makeups, and this is in part because it's a curved course, if you take an exam late, then you had more time to study than everyone else did. And so that gives you an unfair advantage. And so to try and negate that unfair advantage, almost automatically, I'd say almost automatically, makeups are going to be scored down by 5 or 10%. Okay? Now, I'm not an ogre. Ask my kids. I'm not an ogre, and so there are some exceptions to that where I'll waive the penalty for makeups. But it has to be something that's really vivid, clear. It has to be major tragedy, immediate family, or in some cases with advance notice, someone's having a med school interview or is on a sports team and have an out-of-state event that day. I'll strongly consider waiving, waiving the penalty. Okay? I don't want to be unfair about it. It's better off taking the exams at the time they're offered. Okay? Questions about anything so far? I'm really a nice guy. Really. But standards. Okay, so let me think about this a little bit more. What have I missed? So office hours, a lot of things. So I have office hours Mondays, 8 to 10. And that's over in the psychology building, the room 1111C. In terms of things that you can do that will help, in coming to lecture, being awake, listening, thinking, doing the readings as many times as you need to understand it. Come to office hours. That's why we have them. The TAs also have office hours. They're listed up here. So barely read that. Tiffany's are Thursdays at 1 p.m. That's in the room that you're having the discussion section, so the 2209. That's in the psychology building, second floor. That's where you're going to be doing the sheet frame sections. That's where the TAs are going to have the office hours. And Tyler's are Wednesdays at 1. Yes? Pardon me? Okay. I wrote it right, but I said it wrong. Thank you. Okay, what it says up there, not what I said here. Okay, noon to 1. Thank you. And then, you can see me every Tuesday and Thursday. And also after almost every lecture, I'll go out back and spend 5, 10, 15 minutes with students that have questions, answering the things that came up in that particular lecture. So effectively, I have 3 office hours every week. Okay, there may be a couple of times I have meetings right after the lecture that I won't do that, but that's going to be uncommon. Commonly, I'll be out and back doing that. Happy to answer questions about the lecture material. And so basically, you can talk to one of us virtually every day of the week. Lots of opportunity. Okay. Questions? Also, there's something that's going to be instituted that's new this year. It's probably going to be purely optional. If it's working out well, I may take some participation points later. That's to be determined. Okay, probably not though. And that's something that's associated with the textbook called PrepU. I haven't used it before. And what it is supposed to be is that associated with each of the assigned chapters, there are questions that you can go through that are from the textbook. And the way the questions are supposed to work is that what questions you are asked will depend on how well you've answered other questions. So if they're questions that you're answering correctly, they'll make the questions harder, so you learn more about that particular domain. If you're having trouble with a particular subdomain, then the questions will be easier, right? So it's a feedback process, where in doing that, it teaches you what you know. So I could say, for example, after chapter 2, which has already been assigned, I think it's up there. After chapter 2, which is assigned as a study, take PrepU, do 20 questions to a criterion of 15 correct, something like that. So I don't know enough about how that's going to work to, go into it in detail right now. In Grade Center, on iLearn and Grade Center, each of you has an individualized code, access code to that. And then there's a class code as well that's right up there. I'll make an announcement either today or tomorrow about how you get access to PrepU, okay? And we'll just work our way through that one. So it's new. I don't know how well it's going to work. Hope it'll work well. Hope it'll be a benefit to you. Wouldn't do it if I didn't think it was. Okay, so I understand that was a little bit vague. Or will be explained as we go along. Okay. Questions so far? Yeah. The question was, if I understood it, are the office hours exclusive to the students that are in the discussion sections of the TA? Is that the question? Right? Right? The office hours are at the times and days that they're specified for each one of the TAs. Yes. Yes. Right. So there's a name associated with it, right? So it says, Tiffany's are in the place at the time. Tyler's are at the place at the time. So Tyler's on Wednesdays. Tiffany's are whatever it says up there. My short-term memory. Questions? Starting to run out of things, but there's stuff I haven't covered, so give me a minute. You'll need to bear with me a little bit on the technology. They've just changed everything about the technology, the way it works up here. So it'll take me probably a few lectures before I get comfortable where I can go through it without stumbling around too much. I did a pre-learning, but there's a lot on that. So my apologies for any stumbling around. Lecture 1 is in the lecture notes. It's actually a lot about the orientation lecture. It's how to succeed in the class. Okay, so it's some of the same kind of stuff that I said here. So you have 2 reading assignments. I recommend that you do the readings before I cover the material in the lecture. It makes the lecture itself easier to understand. I also recommend that you read through the lecture notes on the next lecture. Okay. So what your reading assignment is in the main textbook, that is the big, Neuroscience Exploring the Brain textbook that I gave to Tyler a few minutes ago. It's read chapter 1 and study chapter 2. So there's a distinction between the read and the study, okay? Read means basically read it, and you're not going to be tested to any great depth on that particular chapter, but it's important to get a kind of overview of it. And the study is self-evident what that means. So chapter 2, learn it backwards and forwards. Now, the reality is that for most of the chapters, very few of you are going to be able to read a chapter once and extract out of it what you need to know. Typically, students need to read a couple of times, at least. And one of the bad things is that sometimes the material in the later chapters, learning it will interfere with what you understood about the earlier chapters. So they're action potentials and synaptic potentials, for example. They're both electrical signals. They work in very different ways. We'll learn about action potentials first, not because they're most important, because they're not at all. They're actually simpler, which is why we study them first. And then you'll study synaptic potentials, and what you learn about synaptic potentials will frequently interfere with what you understood about action potentials. So sometimes you need to go back, circle back, and go back through after you've learned it all. That's just kind of part of what the course is like. Okay. One more thing. What was it? Emails. You're welcome to email me questions. TA is up to them. But, you have umpteen times that you can come see me. Right after class today, most of the times, office hours. So if you email me a question, don't expect me to write a dissertation in the answer. So if you write me a question that I can answer in a word or a sentence, I'll answer it. Otherwise, my reply is going to be, come see me on my office hours, okay? So I may get 10 questions a day from students. There's just so much I can deal with. So make sure your question has got a simple, straightforward answer to it. If it's something that you need explained, come see me, okay? And effectively, I don't do appointments because given that you can see me right after class, and given I've got the office hours, everybody should be able to see me. If you can show me a schedule where you have a class right after this, and you have a class Mondays 8 to 10, I'll make an exception to that. That would be the only time I make appointments. Okay, I'm chair of the department, that's the chair of psychology, and so it's just a really intense, lots of things to do. So it's just, I want to do what I can to help you guys, but I need to balance the workload in the various areas. So that's it. Happy to see you in office hours. Happy to talk with you after class. Last questions? Should be one of the only times you get out early. I usually go from 8:10 bang to the end of class, maybe with a couple of minutes early, sometimes a couple of minutes long. Anything that TAs want to add anything? Good. All right. Thank you.